What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. Russia has finally put its cards on the table and, surprise, surprise, the deck is half missing, half torn apart. The Ministry of Finance just rolled out the 2026-28 draft budget, and what was once presented as a confident roadmap to victory now looks like a frantic attempt to plug holes in a sinking ship. For the first time since the war started in 2022, military spending is not rising, but falling. It finally happened. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. And not because the Kremlin discovered peace, but because the economy has been pushed to the brink and probably even tipped over. It's not official, yet, but some Russian financial wizards are most likely panicking. To keep the circus going, they are slapping new taxes on, guess who? Ordinary people. Hiking value-added tax, shaking down small businesses, and even dipping into the state's rainy day piggy bank, as you all know, National Wealth Fund. But here's the real story. The so-called balanced and sustainable budget is just a glossy cover for financial panic. All revenues are shrinking, the deficit is blowing up, inflation is lurking like a wolf in the shadows, ready to pounce once the new taxes hit. And at the same time, Europe is openly calling Russia an enemy, with drones buzzing across NATO skies, and Trump mocking Putin on the UN stage. Inside Russia, the only growth industry left is repression. The cops, the FSB, these are the ones who are getting more money, while the army gets less. And propaganda, of course. There is always money for propaganda. This is not a policy, this is survival. Survival hanging by a thread. So today, let's peel back the curtain. 4 chapters, 1 collapsing empire, and a final verdict that the Kremlin does not want you to hear. On paper, Russia's 2026 revenues will be 40.3 trillion rubles, while expenditures will hit 44.8 trillion. That leaves a deficit of 4.5 trillion rubles, or nearly $23,000. No, just kidding. Ruble is not that bad yet. 4.5 trillion rubles, approximately $54.3 billion. And that's the optimistic version. In reality, revenue projections are already falling behind last year's expectations. Oil and gas money is drying up, and inflation guarantees that those ruble amounts will buy far less than what is written. This is the same trick the Soviet Union pulled in the 1980s, juggling impressive sounding numbers while whole sectors of the economy crumbled. You remember the old Soviet phrase probably, плановая экономика or planned economy. Well, today's Kremlin is just as addicted to planning charts that exist only on paper, balanced and sustainable, as the finance ministry calls it. That's like saying to a man with a broken spine that he's structurally sound, because he can still crawl and, well, all limbs are in the same place. But where is the money even supposed to come from? Higher value-added tax, VAT, raised from 20 to 25%, and this 2% might not sound a lot, but that's additional 2% on pretty much every single transaction, at least legal, made inside Russia. From buying a piece of bread to ordering brand new $3 million Bugatti Chiron, if it is still possible, everything will be taxed more. Then progressive income taxes increased for the first time on Putin's quarter-century of rule. Privatization of state assets like slices of Sberbank. And of course, massive domestic borrowing, forcing banks to swallow even more of the облигации федерального займа, treasury bonds. This is cannibalism disguised as fiscal policy. The state drowns citizens with taxes, strong arms banks with forced bond purchases, drains the National Wealth Fund until there is barely even a puddle left. And the VAT hike will hit especially hard. 90% of the increase will be passed straight to, you guessed it, consumers, people. A bag of milk, higher. School supplies, higher. Utilities, higher. Russia's inflation had finally crawled down to 6.8% after years stuck in double digits, assuming we believe the official statistics. And now with the tax changes expected to come back, probably even stronger. The central bank will be trapped again in between 2 equally impossible choices. Either cut the rates to spark growth and let inflation explode, or keep rates high and choke whatever little private investments remain. Either way, ordinary Russians pay the bill in the end, as it has always been under Putin's rule. But this time, it is truly different. Because previously, the state did everything possible to squeeze the last pennies and put them to work in the war machine. Now, this very same war machine is expected to be trimmed as well. Let's talk about this in our next chapter. The special military operation was sold as Russia's eternal priority. For 3.5 years, military spending soared, gobbling up nearly 40% of the federal budget. Factories repurposed for weapons production, universities churn out drone engineers instead of doctors, whole industries bent under the weight of militarization. And now, suddenly, the tide shifts. Defense spending is cut from 13.5 trillion rubles to 12.6 trillion. In real terms, this is a 6.5% reduction. The Kremlin, however, still wants people to believe this is strategic, that Russia is winning enough ground to ease off the gas. Reality check, the cut is forced. The money is not there, and the men are not there. Casualties have been gutted regions like Buryatia, Dagestan and Siberia, leaving whole villages without working-age men. Equipment losses have drained stockpiles built up over decades, and Western sanctions have crippled the ability to import the tech needed to replace them. But here is the dirty secret. While military spending falls, national security and law enforcement spending increases. More for the police, the FSB, the Rosgvardia, riot squads and similar. Less for tanks in Donbass, more for batons in Moscow. The Kremlin knows that the real threat is no longer NATO or Ukraine. It is angry Russians who see prices rising, salaries stagnating, and coffins returning from the front. A tanks cannot suppress a protest in Yekaterinburg. A riot policeman dressed to the teeth can. And don't get me wrong, it will take some time, but eventually even Russians will start opening their eyes to unfolding events. That there are no historically Russian lands in Ukraine, that there are no Nazis and Satanists in Europe, that Russia is simply not winning. It is losing, in fact, even more important battle back at home. And this will not leave many people impartial. This shift mirrors late Soviet priorities in the 1980s, when Moscow poured resources into the KGB surveillance, even as the army rusted. Back then, it bought the regime a few extra years, but today, Putin is hoping for the same. But repression does not create prosperity, it only delays the inevitable collapse. But anyways, cutting costs is just one part of the solution to the problem. Another is finding new source of money. As established previously, the ones to suffer the most are obviously the regular people. But let's see exactly what awaits them in our next chapter. When an empire starts taxing bread and gambling in the same breath, you know that desperation is at work. VAT up to 22%, lower thresholds to drag small businesses to the tax net, progressive income tax that looks nice on press release, but the wealthy are the only ones who know how to dodge it. And offshore havens, shell companies and good lawyers are still cheaper than loyalty to the state. It's the middle class and it's lower class definitely that gets crushed. The teachers, shopkeepers, taxi drivers, and, believe it or not, doctors, because they are lower class in Russia, unfortunately. The Bell reported that revenues are falling in nominal terms. That is a death sentence for a budget already straining under debt. Oil and gas revenues are down 20% year over year. Non-oil revenues like VAT are increasing, not because the economy is booming, but because taxes are squeezing everything from ordinary people. It is the equivalent of a landlord raising rent every single year, while the building is falling apart and nobody is doing anything. Privatization? Well, don't be fooled, this is not a free market reform. It's a liquidation sale. The state offloads assets to insiders, keeps control, and calls it restructuring. The goal is not efficiency, it is simply cash. Think of it as Putin's version of a yard sale, except that the neighbors never get invited, and the sale is even over before the advertisement is even appearing in the local newspaper. And looming above it all is the deficit, officially 1.6% of the GDP. Mishustin himself admitted it could be 2.2%. Economists whisper it could hit 2.6% if the slowdown worsens. That is up from 0.5% planned just a year ago. That's billions of rubles we're talking about, 5 times increase. Deficits do not just represent shortfalls, they represent fear. Fear that the war is unwinnable, that oil will not rebound, that inflation will spin out of control. And as soon as one of these things happens, the rest will follow, rest assured. Let's now briefly get our attention away from the economy, because outside of Russia, the wars are closing in as well. Europe's new Chancellor Friedrich Merz says it bluntly: "We are not at war, but we're no longer at peace." Russian drones have violated NATO skies in Estonia, Denmark, Finland and Poland. Warsaw even shot some down. Romania scrambled jets. The message is clear. Russia wants Europe jittery, constantly second-guessing its next move. Hybrid warfare, which is part intimidation, part theater, all of this designed to remind NATO that Moscow can still be a trouble. But Europe is also pushing back. Merz wants to use $300 billion of frozen Russian assets to fund Ukraine for 3 to 5 years. And just imagine the irony. The Kremlin's own war chest funding the weapons that kill its own soldiers. France resists, at least for now, citing legal concerns, but the idea is gaining traction. Even if partial, it would guarantee Kiev's survival long enough for Russia's economy to break under its own weight. And then there's Trump. On the UN stage, he calls Russia a paper tiger. The insult cuts deeper than it seems. For decades, Russia's strength has been a performance. Tanks rolling through Red Square, missiles paraded on TV, leaders boasting of nuclear might. But the paper tiger label strips the illusion bare. A country with falling GDP growth, 0.5 to 1.5% projected for 2026, a shrinking industrial base, collapsing demographics, and a currency at the mercy of oil prices, is definitely not a superpower. It is a fragile empire burning through reserves so to look strong. The ruble will strengthen in 2025, they say, then weaken again in 2026. Oil forecasts drop from $72 to $70 a barrel. Industrial production forecasts shrink. Investment is expected to decline, not grow. These are not the signs of a country on the rise. They are signs of a country that built its house on oil and now plays with fire. And the 2026 draft Russian budget is just a simple confession. Well, there you have it, guys. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to my channel for more news like this. If you wish to support our work and also see the additional chapter in the end of this episode, it will be uploaded on my Patreon, the link is down below. Thanks so much for watching, see you tomorrow.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell. Their twisted words and feeble claims on us all they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway. We do not believe in ridiculous Russian propaganda.